"Mom, why are you digging through those old boxes?" my son asked from the top of the basement stairs, his voice light and distracted, as if he had no idea he just caught me holding the funeral of my own motherhood in my trembling hands. I didn't answer him right away. I just stood there beneath the dim yellow basement light with a dusty cardboard box pressed against my chest, staring at a faded construction paper card covered in crooked glitter letters that read "Best Mom Ever." Daniel had made it for me when he was 7 years old. I remembered helping him sound out every word at our little kitchen table, while spaghetti simmered on the stove and rain tapped softly against the windows of our old Ohio house. Back then, he used to look at me like I was the safest person in the world. Now, at 68 years old, I was standing beneath his staircase like a stranger sorting through forgotten storage. "I was looking for the Christmas ornaments," I finally said quietly. Daniel nodded from upstairs, already halfway back into the kitchen where Vanessa was laughing about something on her phone. "The holiday stuff's probably in the back somewhere," he called down casually before disappearing again. "Somewhere in the back." I looked around the cramped storage space beneath the stairs. The air smelled like dust, cardboard, and old paint. Plastic bins were stacked to the ceiling, carefully labeled in Vanessa's neat handwriting. Fall decor, camping gear, kids' school papers, donate. But shoved furthest into the shadows were 6 old boxes with no labels at all. Just tape, dust, silence. I had pulled one forward thinking maybe the ornaments were inside. Instead, I found pieces of my entire life. Every Mother's Day card Daniel had ever given me. Crayon drawings of stick figures holding hands beneath giant suns. A little ceramic mug he made in 5th grade with blue fingerprints hardened into the clay forever. Old family photo albums I hadn't seen in years. Even the tiny Yankees jacket he used to wear when his father coached Little League on cold spring mornings. All of it packed tightly into boxes like someone had cleaned out the evidence that I had ever mattered here. I sat down, slowly on the unfinished basement floor, my knees aching against the concrete. Dust floated through the single shaft of light above me. Somewhere upstairs, I could hear Vanessa opening cabinets and the television murmuring in the background. Ordinary sounds, comfortable sounds, family sounds. But down there beneath the stairs, it felt like I had uncovered a graveyard no one intended me to find. My fingers brushed across another photograph. Daniel at 12 years old smiling beside me at Cedar Point, missing one front tooth and clutching a giant stuffed bear I spent $40 trying to win for him because he'd cried after losing the carnival game 3 times. I remembered driving 6 hours home that night with sunburned shoulders and exhaustion settling deep into my bones, but I had been happy. Mothers lived for those moments. We built our entire identities around them. And now those memories sat sealed in cardboard beneath a staircase beside old extension cords and unused luggage. I swallowed hard as I opened another box. Inside was a framed photograph from Daniel's college graduation. I noticed something strange immediately. The glass was cracked straight through the center. Not shattered. Just one clean fracture running directly between my face and his. I stared at it for a long time. Then I heard Vanessa's footsteps above me. "Daniel says Mom found the memory boxes," she said lightly, not even lowering her voice enough for me not to hear. Honestly, I didn't know what else to do with all that stuff. A pause. Then my son answered quietly, "Yeah, I know." That was the moment something inside me finally went still. That evening, I carried one of the smaller boxes upstairs and placed it quietly beside the guest bed where I had been sleeping for the past 8 months. The room used to belong to Daniel's youngest daughter before Vanessa decided the girls should share the larger bedroom at the end of the hall. She had explained it with that careful smile of hers, the one that always sounded polite while making you feel foolish for existing. "This setup just makes more sense for everybody," she had said back then while handing me fresh towels like she was checking me into a hotel instead of rearranging my place in the family. I sat on the edge of the narrow mattress and opened the box again beneath the warm glow of the bedside lamp. The house had gone quiet. I could hear the dishwasher humming downstairs and the occasional creak of footsteps overhead as the grandchildren settled into bed. Outside the window, December rain slid slowly down the glass, blurring the neighboring porch lights into soft yellow smears. I picked up an old photograph from the top of the pile. Daniel was 16 in the picture, lanky and grinning beside the used pickup truck his father and I spent nearly a year saving for. I remembered clipping grocery coupons, taking extra shifts at the public library, and canceling a vacation we had planned for our 20th anniversary, just so he could have that truck before junior year started. Back then, sacrifice did not feel heavy. It felt natural. Mothers built entire lives out of giving things away. Sleep, time, money, dreams. We handed over pieces of ourselves so quietly that no one noticed they were disappearing. I traced my thumb gently across the faded edge of the photograph before setting it aside. Beneath it was a stack of school papers tied together with a fraying blue ribbon. Report cards, spelling tests, little handwritten notes from teachers thanking me for volunteering during field trips and bake sales. Every page smelled faintly of old paper and dust. I realized then that Vanessa had not simply packed random keepsakes away. She had sorted through them carefully, decided what remained visible upstairs and what disappeared below the staircase. The realization settled into my chest slowly, like cold water filling an empty sink. Earlier that afternoon, when I came upstairs carrying one of the boxes, Vanessa barely glanced at it. She was standing at the kitchen island arranging white ceramic houses for the Christmas display she always posted online every December. Perfect little houses. Perfect little lights. Perfect little family. "Oh good," she had said lightly while adjusting one of the decorations. I was hoping somebody would finally go through those old things. Old things. Remembered standing there holding 30 years of motherhood against my chest, while she lined fake snow along the counter. Daniel had looked up from his laptop for only a second before lowering his eyes again. "Mom, if there is anything important in there, just keep it," he muttered quietly. Anything important? I almost laughed remembering it now because every single thing in those boxes had once been important enough for me to build my life around. Around midnight, I opened the final envelope resting at the bottom of the box. Inside was a letter written in Daniel's uneven college handwriting. I recognized it immediately because I had carried it in my purse for years after his freshman semester. "Dear Mom, I know I do not say this enough, but thank you for believing in me before I believed in myself. Everything good in my life started with you." I read the letter twice. Then I folded it carefully and stared at the rain sliding down the dark window. Somewhere downstairs, the automatic lights on the Christmas tree flickered on, glowing softly through the hallway like a house trying very hard to look warm. The next morning, I woke before sunrise the way I always had during the years Daniel was growing up. Mothers rarely stopped being mothers, even when there was no one left who needed them. For a few quiet seconds, lying there beneath the heavy guest room blanket, I forgot where I was. Then I saw the stacked boxes beside the dresser and remembered everything at once. The rain had stopped overnight, leaving the windows fogged pale silver in the cold December dawn. I slipped on my robe and walked quietly downstairs. The kitchen was spotless, exactly the way Vanessa liked it. White countertops, matching glass canisters, a bowl of decorative pine cones placed carefully in the center island like nobody actually cooked there anymore. I started the coffee maker out of habit and stood waiting while the machine hissed softly into the silence. Years ago, mornings in our old family house had sounded different. Daniel racing downstairs half-dressed because he missed the bus again. His father searching for car keys while sports radio played too loudly from the living room. Pancakes burning slightly because I was helping with homework at the same time. Back then the house had been messy, loud, alive. This one felt staged. Beautiful but careful. Like a furniture showroom pretending to be a home. I poured myself coffee and glanced toward the hallway wall where family photographs hung in matching silver frames. Vanessa had arranged them there after the kitchen remodel last spring. I walked closer slowly, warming my hands around the mug. Vacation photos. School portraits. Christmas cards. Smiling faces frozen beneath soft lighting. But suddenly I noticed something that made my chest tighten. There was not a single photograph of me on that wall anymore. Not one. No pictures from Daniel's childhood. No family beach trips. No Thanksgiving dinners from years ago when I still sat at the head of the table carving turkey beside my husband. Even the wedding photograph where I had stood beside Daniel in a navy blue dress was gone. It had all disappeared so gradually I had never noticed until now. "You are up early." Vanessa's voice startled me from behind. She entered the kitchen already dressed for the day in cream leggings and a fitted sweater, carrying her phone in one hand. I stepped aside automatically as she opened the refrigerator. "Could not sleep," I answered quietly. She nodded absently while pouring almond milk into a blender. The girls have holiday choir practice tonight, she said. Dinner will probably be late. I waited for her to mention the boxes downstairs. She did not. Instead, she glanced briefly toward the photo wall and smiled faintly. I finally updated those frames last month, she said proudly. It feels cleaner now. More current. Cleaner. More current. I looked back at the smiling photographs. Daniel and Vanessa skiing in Colorado. The girls dressed as angels at church. Their new golden retriever asleep beside the fireplace. An entire family history carefully edited into something neat and modern. Something without me in it. Daniel shuffled into the kitchen a few minutes later, still wearing sweatpants, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Morning, Mom," he mumbled before reaching for coffee. He looked tired lately. Small lines had settled around his mouth over the past few years. For a moment I saw flashes of the boy he used to be. The little boy who crawled into my lap after thunderstorms and insisted I leave the hallway light on outside his room every night until middle school. "Daniel," I said softly before I could stop myself. He glanced up. "Do you remember that old Yankees jacket Dad bought you when you were 9? His expression flickered briefly with surprise. "The blue one?" "Yes." He gave a short laugh. "Wow. I forgot all about that thing." Forgot. The word landed harder than I expected. I nodded slowly and looked down into my coffee cup while silence stretched quietly between us. Upstairs, one of the girls started practicing piano. Soft, uncertain notes drifting through the house like memories trying not to disappear. That afternoon, I volunteered to pick up the girls from choir practice because Vanessa said she still needed time to finish wrapping presents for the neighborhood holiday exchange. She thanked me quickly without really looking at me, already distracted by a delivery driver at the front door carrying more brown boxes into the house. Everything in that home seemed to arrive in boxes now. Decorations, furniture, storage bins, pieces of life constantly being rearranged. The church parking lot was nearly full when I arrived just before 6 o'clock. Christmas lights wrapped around the old brick building, glowing softly against the dark winter sky. I sat inside my car listening to the heater hum while children's voices drifted faintly through the sanctuary doors. For the first time in weeks I felt calm. Churches still smelled the same no matter how much the world changed. Old wood, candles, coffee brewing somewhere in the fellowship hall. Familiar things. Safe things. A few minutes later, my oldest granddaughter Lily spotted me through the glass doors and waved excitedly before running across the parking lot in her oversized red coat. "Grandma Eleanor," she shouted as she climbed into the back seat. Her little sister Emma followed behind carrying a paper angel covered in glitter. "Look what I made," Emma announced proudly, holding it up carefully. "Dad says we can hang it in the upstairs hallway." "Upstairs hallway." I smiled softly. "It is beautiful, sweetheart." Lily buckled her seatbelt and leaned forward between the seats. "Mom moved all the old pictures out of that hallway so there would be room for the new family wall," she explained innocently. "She said the old ones made the house look crowded." I kept both hands steady on the steering wheel. "Did she?" Lily nodded without noticing my expression. "She let us pick our favorite new pictures instead. Dad picked the Disney one." Emma held the glitter angel carefully in her lap while streetlights slid across the windshield in long yellow streaks. "I like the old pictures," she said quietly. "There was one where Dad had really funny hair." Lily giggled. "Mom said those pictures were outdated." Outdated. Another small word. Another tiny cut wrapped in politeness. When we arrived home, the house glowed warmly from every window. Vanessa had lit scented candles throughout the downstairs and soft Christmas music played from hidden speakers near the kitchen. Everything looked perfect, beautiful, thoughtfully arranged. The kind of home people admired in magazines while never noticing what had been removed to create all that perfection. I helped the girls hang their coats while Vanessa admired Emma's glitter angel. "That is adorable," she said brightly before glancing toward the staircase. "We will put it upstairs with the rest of the new decorations." Something about the word new suddenly exhausted me. During dinner, Daniel talked about work deadlines while Vanessa discussed school fundraising committees and holiday brunch plans with neighbors. The girls laughed over hot chocolate topped with marshmallows. Normal family conversation filled the room. But I noticed something I had never fully allowed myself to see before. Every tradition now belonged to Vanessa. the recipes, the decorations, the holiday schedules. Even the stories told at the dinner table centered around her side of the family. Daniel moved through it all quietly, adjusting himself around her routines like water shaped by whatever container held it. At one point Emma accidentally spilled milk across the tablecloth and immediately looked terrified. Vanessa sighed sharply and reached for paper towels. "Emma, please be careful," she said with controlled irritation. Before I could think, I stood up automatically. "It is all right, sweetheart," I told Emma gently while wiping the spill. "Accidents happen." Emma's small shoulders relaxed instantly. For one brief moment, she smiled at me with complete trust. The same trust Daniel used to have when he was little. The same look that once made every sacrifice feel worthwhile. Then Vanessa's voice cut softly across the table. "Mom, you do not have to jump in every time. The girls need consistency." I froze with the towel still in my hands. Nobody spoke after that. Even the girls lowered their eyes toward their plates. Daniel cleared his throat quietly and reached for his water glass, but he said nothing. Not one word. And sitting there beneath the warm dining room lights, surrounded by polished silverware and carefully folded linen napkins, I realized silence had become my son's favorite way of agreeing with his wife. 2 days later, I carried another box upstairs while the house was empty except for me. Vanessa had taken the girls Christmas shopping at the mall, and Daniel was downtown meeting clients before the holiday break. Snow drifted softly outside the kitchen windows, covering the backyard patio furniture in quiet white layers. The whole house felt suspended in stillness. I placed the box carefully on the dining room table and slowly removed the tape across the top. Inside were old videotapes, stacks of birthday cards, and several photo albums wrapped in a faded green blanket I recognized immediately. It had once covered Daniel's crib when he was a baby. I sat down slowly and opened the nearest album. The first photograph showed me at 27 years old holding newborn Daniel against my chest in a hospital room flooded with pale morning sunlight. My hair was messy. My eyes looked exhausted, but I was smiling with the kind of happiness that comes from believing love alone can hold a family together forever. I turned another page. Daniel learning to ride a bicycle in our old driveway while his father ran behind. Him holding the seat. Daniel asleep beside our golden retriever after Little League practice. Daniel opening Christmas presents in flannel pajamas beside a tree decorated entirely with handmade ornaments. Every page smelled faintly of old paper and time. I did not realize tears had started slipping down my face until one landed softly against the plastic photo cover. At some point I heard the front door open. I quickly wiped my cheeks and looked up as Margaret Hale stepped into the kitchen carrying a foil tray covered with a red towel. Margaret lived next door and had been my closest friend since I moved into Daniel's house after my husband passed away 3 years earlier. She paused when she saw the albums spread across the table. "Oh, Eleanor," she said softly. Her voice carried no pity. Somehow that made it worse. "Vanessa asked me to drop off the cinnamon rolls for tomorrow morning," she explained while setting the tray beside the counter. Then her eyes drifted back toward the photographs. "Are those Daniel's old albums?" I nodded quietly. Margaret walked closer and gently picked up one of the photographs near the edge of the table. "You kept everything," she whispered. "Mothers usually do," I answered. She studied my face for a long moment before sitting down across from me. The dining room suddenly felt smaller, somehow warmer too. Outside, snow continued falling in slow, silent waves. "Can I tell you something honestly?" Margaret asked carefully. I gave a small nod. She folded her hands together before speaking. "I have watched you slowly disappear inside this house for years." Her words settled heavily between us. I stared down at the photograph still resting in my hands. "It did not happen all at once," she continued gently. "That is why you did not notice it at first." I thought about the hallway photographs, the boxed memories, the guest room downstairs, the way every family tradition now carried Vanessa's fingerprints instead of mine. Tiny changes, small rearrangements, one piece at a time. Margaret glanced toward the staircase before lowering her voice slightly. "You know what the saddest part is?" she asked. "They probably think they are being practical, organized, efficient." I gave a tired smile that barely felt real. "Maybe they are." "No," Margaret said quietly. "People do not store away love. unless they are trying to make room for something else. Silence filled the dining room after that. Somewhere upstairs, the heating system clicked softly through the vents. I looked down at another photograph in my lap. Daniel at 5 years old, missing his front teeth, holding a sign that read "My mom is my hero" during a school assembly. I stared at those crooked little letters for a long time. Then I asked the question I had been too afraid to say aloud until that moment. "Margaret," I whispered carefully, "what happens when the people you built your whole life around stop seeing you as part of it?" Margaret reached across the table and rested her hand gently over mine. "Then," she said softly, "you stop begging to be included." After Margaret left that afternoon, I sat alone at the dining room table long after the cinnamon rolls had gone cold beside the counter. Snow continued drifting past the windows in slow, quiet spirals, softening the edges of the world outside. I looked around the house carefully for the first time in years. The expensive white curtains, the matching holiday pillows arranged perfectly across the living room sofa, the carefully chosen candles glowing beside stacks of untouched coffee table books. Vanessa had built a beautiful home. Nobody could deny that. But suddenly I understood something I had been refusing to admit to myself. Beautiful and welcoming were not always the same thing. Around 4 o'clock, I carried the photo albums back downstairs one at a time. Not because I wanted to hide them again, but because I realized something important while holding those boxes in my hands. Those memories were mine before they ever belonged to anyone else. Nobody could erase them simply by moving them beneath a staircase. The basement felt colder now. Or maybe I simply noticed the cold more clearly than before. I stacked the boxes neatly beside the wall and paused when I spotted a small cassette recorder buried beneath an old blanket. I almost smiled. Daniel's father had bought that recorder at a garage sale when Daniel was 10 years old because our son wanted to become a radio announcer after listening to baseball games every summer. I pressed the dusty play button carefully. Static crackled through the tiny speaker for several seconds before a child's voice suddenly filled the basement. "Testing, testing," young Daniel announced dramatically. Then laughter. Mine. His father's. More static. "Okay," Daniel said proudly into the recorder. "Interview time. Mom, what is your favorite thing about being my mom?" My breath caught softly in my throat. I sat down slowly on the bottom basement step while the recording continued. My younger voice answered through faint crackling tape. "My favorite thing is getting to love you every day." Silence followed for a second before little Daniel spoke again. "Even when I am bad?" "Especially then," I answered on the tape. The recorder clicked softly as the tape ended. I stared at the machine resting in my lap while the basement hummed quietly around me. Somewhere upstairs, I heard Vanessa vacuuming the living room. Ordinary sounds. Everyday sounds. But down there beneath the staircase, time felt suspended between who my son used to be and who he had become. I realized then that I had spent the last 3 years after my husband's death trying to remain useful enough to deserve space in this house. Babysitting whenever asked. Folding laundry before anyone noticed it needed folding. Cooking dinners that no longer matched Vanessa's meal plans. Quietly shrinking myself around their routines so I would not feel like a burden. And still, piece by piece, I had been moved out of sight anyway. The understanding should have devastated me. Instead, it left behind something colder. Clearer. For the first time in months, I stopped wondering how to make them need me again. Upstairs, footsteps crossed the kitchen floor overhead. Then Daniel's voice drifted faintly through the vents. "Did Mom pick up the girls tomorrow too?" Vanessa answered without hesitation. "Hopefully. I have too much to finish before Christmas." I closed my eyes briefly. Not cruel. Not grateful either. Just expectant. Like I had quietly become part of the household. Machinery. Useful when needed. Invisible when not. I opened my eyes and looked around the basement one final time. Boxes stacked neatly beneath the stairs. Old memories sealed shut in cardboard. The smell of dust and forgotten things hanging in the cold air. Then slowly, very slowly, I stood up. And for the first time since moving into that house after my husband died, I stopped thinking about how to stay. The following Monday, I left the house just after 8 in the morning carrying only my purse and a folder of paperwork I had not touched in years. Vanessa barely looked up from her laptop when I told her I would be out for most of the day. "Could you still grab Emma from dance practice at 4?" she asked absently while scrolling through emails. I stood there for a second watching her framed by the soft glow of the kitchen pendant lights, already dressed perfectly despite the early hour. 3 years ago, after my husband died, I had mistaken being needed for being loved. No, I answered calmly while buttoning my coat. I do not think I can today. Her fingers paused above the keyboard for the briefest moment before continuing again. Okay, she said lightly, though I could hear the irritation underneath. I will figure something out. Figure something out. I nodded once and walked out into the cold December air. The apartment complex Margaret recommended sat on the quiet side of town near a small lake that froze every winter. Nothing fancy. Just a modest brick building with wide windows and clean sidewalks dusted with snow. The property manager, a silver-haired woman named Denise, greeted me warmly and showed me a one-bedroom unit overlooking the water. The apartment smelled faintly of fresh paint and coffee. Sunlight streamed across the hardwood floors in pale golden rectangles. Small. Quiet. Empty. But for the first time in a very long while, the emptiness did not frighten me. Denise chatted kindly about holiday leasing specials while I wandered slowly through the apartment, touching countertops and windowsills like someone learning the shape of freedom again. Most people your age downsize because they want less stress, Denise explained gently. Closer to grandchildren. Less maintenance. I smiled politely without correcting her. Sometimes people only understood loneliness when it arrived loudly. Mine had arrived decorated with Christmas lights and careful smiles. By noon I had signed the lease. My hands trembled slightly as I wrote my name across the final page. Eleanor Whitmore. The signature looked steadier than I felt. Afterward, I sat alone in my car overlooking the frozen lake while snow drifted lightly against the windshield. I expected guilt, fear, sadness. Instead, I felt strangely calm, as if some invisible pressure pressing against my chest for years had finally loosened. On the drive back, I stopped at the bank where my husband and I had kept our accounts for nearly 40 years. The young teller recognized me immediately and smiled warmly. Mrs. Whitmore, it is so nice to see you again. Her kindness nearly undid me. Inside the manager's office, I updated beneficiaries, transferred several savings accounts, and quietly removed Daniel's access from emergency financial documents he had not looked at in years anyway. Nobody argued. Nobody questioned me. Papers shifted quietly across polished desks, while Christmas music played softly through the speakers overhead. Ordinary business. Quiet decisions. Life-changing anyway. By the time I returned to the house, the sky had already darkened into soft winter blue. I stepped inside carrying grocery bags and found tension waiting for me before the front door even closed. Vanessa stood at the kitchen island with her jaw tight while Daniel paced near the dining room. Emma waited almost 40 minutes, Vanessa said immediately. The studio nearly closed before I got there. I set the grocery bags down carefully. I told you this morning I could not pick her up. Yes, but usually you always help, she answered sharply. Usually. The word hung in the air between us. Daniel finally looked at me directly. Mom, if something is wrong you can just tell us. I studied my son quietly. His tired eyes. The faint gray beginning at his temples. For one painful second, I saw the little boy from the cassette recording again asking if I would still love him when he was bad. Nothing is wrong, I said softly. And for the first time since moving into that house, I realized I was telling the truth. Over the next few days, I began moving small things into the apartment one quiet trip at a time. Nothing dramatic. A lamp from the guest room. My winter coats. 2 boxes of photographs. The green blanket from Daniel's crib. Nobody noticed at first because mothers spend so much of their lives carrying things in and out of houses that eventually they become invisible while doing it. Christmas arrived 3 days later wrapped in fresh snow and soft golden lights across the neighborhood. The house buzzed with activity from sunrise onward. Cinnamon rolls baking in the oven. Wrapping paper crinkling across the living room floor. The girls laughing loudly upstairs. Vanessa moved through the kitchen in matching holiday pajamas with the children while organizing breakfast trays for photographs she planned to post online later that morning. Everything looked perfect again. But perfection always requires somebody to quietly disappear behind it. Around 9 o'clock I came downstairs wearing the navy blue sweater my husband used to love. The same one from the old photographs now buried in boxes downstairs. Emma ran toward me immediately carrying a small handmade ornament shaped like a snowflake. "This one is for you, Grandma Eleanor," she announced proudly. I knelt carefully and hugged her close. "Thank you, sweetheart." Before I could say anything else, Vanessa glanced over from the kitchen island. "Girls, leave Grandma alone for a little while. She probably wants to rest." Rest. Such a polite word for removal. Emma stepped back obediently while I stood there holding the paper snowflake in my hands. Daniel appeared from the hallway carrying coffee mugs. "Mom, could you actually watch the girls this afternoon?" he asked casually. "Vanessa and I got invited to the Hendersons' Christmas dinner tonight, and childcare is impossible this week." I looked at my son quietly. He already sounded relieved before I even answered, as if my yes belonged to him automatically. "No," I said gently. The room fell strangely silent. Vanessa looked up immediately. "No," she repeated carefully, like she thought she had misheard me. "I have plans this evening." Technically it was true. I planned to sit alone beside my new apartment window and watch snow fall across the frozen lake while nobody asked me to earn my place in the room. Daniel blinked in confusion. "Since when?" I smiled faintly. "Since recently." Nobody spoke after that. The girls returned to opening presents while tension settled quietly across the kitchen like invisible frost. Later that afternoon, I drove to the apartment carrying another load of boxes in my trunk. The lake behind the building had frozen completely now, smooth and silver beneath the pale winter sky. Inside the apartment, sunlight stretched warmly across the empty floor while I unpacked dishes into clean cabinets and arranged framed photographs along the windowsill. Not all of them, only the ones I wanted. There was no pressure to erase parts of my life there. No need to compete with newer memories. Around 6 o'clock my phone buzzed. Daniel's name flashed across the screen. I answered after the third ring. "Mom," he said immediately, sounding exhausted. "Vanessa is upset. She feels like you have been distant lately." I stood quietly beside the apartment window watching snow drift slowly over the frozen lake. "Have I?" I asked softly. He sighed heavily. "You know what I mean." Another silence stretched between us. Then his voice lowered slightly. "The girls miss you downstairs with us." Downstairs. Such a small accidental phrase. Yet somehow it explained everything. I closed my eyes briefly before answering. "Daniel," I said gently, "do you know where all the old family photographs are?" He hesitated. "What?" "The albums. The keepsakes. The old memories." More silence. Then finally, quietly, "Mom, why does that matter?" I looked around my small peaceful apartment. My lamp glowing softly beside the couch. My husband's old record player near the bookshelf. The boxes no longer hidden beneath anyone's stares. "That," I answered calmly, "is exactly what I finally understand." 3 days after Christmas, I returned to the house just before sunset to collect the final boxes from beneath the staircase. The neighborhood looked quiet under fresh snow, soft smoke rising from chimneys while pale winter light faded across the rooftops. For years, I had looked at that house and thought it represented family, stability, belonging. Now it simply looked like a place where I used to live. Vanessa opened the front door before I even knocked. Her expression tightened slightly when she saw the empty plastic storage bins stacked in the back seat of my car. "You are taking more things?" she asked carefully. Not angry, just unsettled. I smiled politely. "Only what belongs to me." She stepped aside without answering. Inside, the house smelled faintly of cinnamon candles and laundry detergent. The Christmas tree still glowed in the corner of the living room, though several ornaments had already been removed. Half decorated, half dismantled. Somehow it felt appropriate. Daniel appeared at the bottom of the stairs as I removed my gloves. He looked tired again. Older somehow. "Mom," he said quietly, "can we talk for a minute?" I looked at him for a long moment before nodding once. We sat alone at the dining room table while Vanessa disappeared upstairs with stiff, controlled movements. The same table where I had spent hundreds of evenings helping with homework, planning birthday parties, wrapping Christmas gifts long after midnight while everyone else slept upstairs. Daniel folded his hands together awkwardly. "The girls said you have your own apartment now." "Yes. You should have told me." I studied his face carefully. the familiar shape of his jaw, the tiny scar near his eyebrow from falling off his bicycle at age 11, while I ran barefoot down the driveway terrified he had broken his neck. Mothers remembered everything. Sons often remembered only the finished version of themselves. I think, I answered softly, you stopped asking how I felt a very long time ago. Pain flickered briefly across his expression before disappearing behind exhaustion. That is not fair. I almost smiled at that. Fair. Such an interesting word from someone who had quietly watched me disappear room by room inside his own home. Upstairs, I could hear Emma laughing faintly at something on television. Life continuing normally above us while something important quietly ended below it. Daniel rubbed both hands across his face before speaking again. Vanessa thinks you are upset with her. Are you asking for her? I asked gently. Or for yourself? He looked down immediately. Silence answered for him. I stood up slowly and walked toward the basement door before either of us said another word. The storage space beneath the staircase looked smaller than I remembered. Dust floated through the single overhead light, while the remaining boxes sat neatly against the wall waiting for me. I carried them upstairs one at a time without rushing. Family photographs, old report cards, the cassette recorder, 30 years of motherhood packed into cardboard containers nobody upstairs had missed until I started taking them away. When I carried the final box through the kitchen, Emma suddenly ran toward me wearing pink socks and holding her paper snowflake ornament from Christmas morning. Grandma Eleanor, she asked softly, are you leaving for good? The whole house seemed to go still around us. Vanessa froze near the sink. Daniel stood motionless beside the hallway. I looked down at my granddaughter carefully, her small worried face, her wide uncertain eyes, and for one painful moment, I understood how easily love could disappear when people became too comfortable expecting it to stay forever. I knelt slowly and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. No, sweetheart, I answered gently. I am finally going somewhere I belong to. Then I stood up, carried the final box out the front door, and walked into the cold December evening without looking back. Behind me, the house still glowed beautifully through the snow-covered windows. Warm, perfect, carefully arranged. But for the first time in years, I no longer felt buried beneath it.